Welcome back to the Lonestar Collective, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective. I'm your host, Chris Grisolia, and I'm joined this week by my very special guest, Dr. Joe D. Goldstrich. I first learned of Dr. Joe when he was working on a documentary that I was working on back in 2019 that basically talked about the subject of how important anecdotal evidence can be in this when you're talking about medical cannabis and using it to treat various conditions and whatnot. He was gracious enough to join me for that documentary then, which I am still very deeply grateful for that collaboration. As a retired cardiologist who then became a cannabis clinician, please welcome my guest, Dr. Joe Goldstrich. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Doc, it's a super pleasure for me to have you here. When you join us today, obviously, to talk about the new release of your new book, The Cannabis Cancer Connection. Sorry for getting tongue twisted there. This was just released about a month ago, right?
Yes.
Now,
available on Amazon.
Is that the only place it's available right now is on Amazon?
Yeah. Yes, only place.
That's a good place for it to be. It gets a lot of exposure, I'm sure. Now, tell us a little more about your history as a physician and how you came to practice cannabis as medicine and that whole storyline. Just give us a brief rundown if you could.
That's a long story because I tried cannabis and I was living in Dallas, and some high school buddies of mine and we drove down to Mexico and bought a dime bag of cannabis. I don't even know if it was really cannabis or some other herb, but we smoked it and not much happened. And so I put it on the back burner for a while. Throughout the rest of my, I didn't smoke at all while I was in medical school. It was only afterwards in the 70s when I smoked again and really enjoyed it, and I have been a fan ever since. So in around 2010 or so, I retired as a cardiologist. I'd been working in New Jersey, and I came back to Iowa, and I didn't have anything to do, and I got depressed. And I remembered how happy I was when I was smoking cannabis, and so I decided I'd see if that would be helpful for my depression. Of course it was. Then shortly thereafter, I saw an ad for a job in California at a clinic giving medical cannabis recommendations. And so I signed up for that. And the first clinic that I worked at, I lasted 6 days because it really wasn't a legitimate operation. They were just giving the card to everybody who asked for it. And at that time, I was not okay with that. And the Medical Board of California would not approve of me doing that without proper medical records. And so I quit after 6 days and came back to Iowa for a while. And then I saw another ad for a clinic in Oakland, California. And I called the doctor who owned the clinic, Dr. Gene Talleyrand, and he had several clinics in California, and we had a long conversation, and I was convinced that it was a legitimate operation like the first one. And so I went out to Oakland and met Dr. Talleyrand personally and went to work for the clinic. And that year, which was 2014, I saw about 3,500 patients who wanted the medical card. And those patients taught me most everything I know about the use of cannabis for a wide variety of medical conditions. But I did not know anything about cancer, and there were patients that came and wanted to know how to use cannabis for cancer. So later in 2014, I was at a conference in Colorado at which Mara Gordon spoke. And in that presentation, she showed some pictures of a couple of patients who had brain cancer who used cannabis and their tumors shrunk. And I knew at that moment that that's what I wanted to do, that I wanted to specialize in cannabis medicine and work with cancer patients. And it's been a journey from that point forward, and I continue to learn. It's been a total learning experience, and there's still much to learn, much research to be done before we really know how to most effectively use cannabis in the treatment of cancer.
Yeah, we've come a long way in the last 10 to 15 years, but you're right. There's a long, long way to go yet. Talking about the book, in the introduction, you talk about what it contains in the book, et cetera, but you also break down the real history of the making cannabis illegal and the politics that was involved in all of that. And that fact that politics is still the real roadblock to making significant change in America today. Can you elaborate on that point a little bit?
Well, the demonization of cannabis came about primarily from two individuals. Harry Anslinger, who was the first director of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, had a real mission to demonize cannabis. He was backed up by Richard Nixon, who wanted to demonize minorities, Hispanic and African Americans, and the anti-war hippies. And so cannabis, even though the AMA testified that cannabis was a good medicine, Nixon went ahead and enacted the Marijuana Tax Act, and that was the beginning of this cascade of events that not only made cannabis Schedule I, but it also promulgated this demonization around the world. The United States was involved in many treaties with other countries. And now as we're moving forward, we still have to neutralize those treaties that were made 50 years ago because other countries adopted our position. And in my opinion, they now have on the table to reschedule cannabis to Schedule III from Schedule I. But I believe that cannabis should be descheduled because Schedule III, although it makes it easier to do research and we'll have more clinical trials, we'll have more cannabis produced for this research, all these things will happen, but it's going to open up another can of worms, and there's going to be more problems because it's still making it a drug that a doctor has to prescribe, even though it's Schedule III and it can be prescribed, as opposed to Schedule I where it can't be prescribed. Even though it's going to be better, sort of, it's going to create new problems and still put limits on cannabis in a way that should not be. And so I'm a proponent of total descheduling of cannabis.
I agree wholeheartedly with you on that for the very same grounds. It's to me that we're still having to have these conversations, and I think you got a little mixed up there. Nixon signed the Controlled Substances Act in 1970. It was the Tax Act that was undone in 1969 by the Supreme Court by none other than the case presented by Timothy Leary, was it not?
You're
diving into something deeper than you.
Yeah, right.
I'll be educational then. In 1969, on May 19th, there was a case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. It was Leary versus the United States, and it was about the Marijuana Tax Act, which was actually passed and into law. And I couldn't even think off the top of my head right now which president signed it, but it was in 1937 when that was passed. And it was very much Harry Anslinger and that whole mess that you were bringing up there that brought that all about. But that was like over 80 years ago. And then 1969, Timothy Leary, which I believe you've actually met Timothy Leary at one point in time.
Yes,
you talk about that in the book. But he had arrested, I guess, I believe it was for possession of cannabis or marijuana. And of course, they used the with the H back in those days. And he fought all the way to the Supreme Court, and he ended up winning. And of course, it infuriated Nixon as Nixon took office that they declared that law. They declared it because it went against the very things that he was trying to do, well, like you had described with the hippies and the African Americans and whatnot. And of course, this was one drug. Heroin was the other one, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So at any rate, that being said, we've got a quick sponsor break, but after we come back, I want to dive into what you get pretty deep into, which is how to use cannabis to kill cancer. That's, of course, the biggest subject of the book, right? So when we come back after the sponsor break, we want to dive into that.
Okay.
All right. We'll do that right after this sponsor break.
Howdy, Colt Power here. These days, many people are choosing to add CBD to their wellness routine. Why? Some like CBD for how it may help them with their focus. Others enjoy the way the plant compound may assist them with their sore muscles and relaxation. For me, CBD has been a game changer in keeping my old sports injuries managed so I can work out and be present for my family. If you've ever been curious about CBD, I invite you to check out our Texas-grown, Texas-made products at powerbiofarms.com. That's power, BIOPHARMS.com.
Thrive Apothecary offers an experience truly unique from anything else in Texas. A full-service cannabis solution that is doctor-owned and offers customers every level of cannabis legally available in Texas. From traditional CBD products to emerging hemp-derived THC edibles, smokables, and now medical cannabis. As a licensed medical cannabis provider, prospective patients from anywhere in Texas can book a sponsored online eligibility consultation to determine if they qualify for a medical marijuana prescription from the comfort of their own home. Visit thrivetx.com for more information.
Welcome back to the Lonestar Collective podcast, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective, distributed on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and many more, to give Texans information regarding policy, industry, and culture. And now, back to this week's show.
Star Collective podcast, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective. I'm joined this week by our very special guest, Dr. Joe Goldstrich. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you.
We're talking about your new book, The Cannabis Cancer Connection, that was just out on Amazon last month. And in it, you dive deep into the whole subject that a lot of people are interested in. And that's how to use cannabis oil to kill cancer, not just using it in general speaking, but in depth through methods of ingestion, dosing, the different cultivars and how that matters, titration, and the list just goes on and on. You even go into many different types of cancer that you've experienced with patients using cannabis. And so I'm going to give you this opportunity to just dive in and tell our audience and our listeners what the book's about and why you think it's important to get it out there.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do that. How to use cannabis to kill cancer. Cannabis is an umbrella word that really covers over 500 compounds that have been found in the plant. There are cannabinoids, there are terpenes, there are flavonoids, there are polyphenols, there are over 500 compounds. As of last year, 166 unique and different cannabinoids have been identified, according to Dr. Didi Mary's research in Israel. So when we say cannabis, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about over 500 things. Now, not every plant has all 500 unique compounds. And for that reason, not every plant will be effective for treating cancer or treating other things as well. The major cannabinoid in cannabis that has the ability to kill cancer cells is THC. But THC is not the only compound. CBD has anti-cancer activity. CBG, cannabigerol, which is the mother of all cannabinoids. In the plant, cannabigerol acid is converted to THC, CBD, CBN, CBDV. All of the other cannabinoids come from cannabigerol, and cannabigerol itself has extensive anti-cancer activity, which we just learned about in the past couple of years. When you use cannabis to treat, it's important for most cases to include THC. And I go into the details of how to use THC. When I first started, I was recommending huge amounts of THC to people and not really giving them good instructions on how to get to that high level, because I just didn't know about that at the time. But really, the way to use THC to treat cancer is to start low and to build up slowly. Usually you can start that process at bedtime, about 30 or 45 minutes before you put your head on the pillow, and take your dose of THC, starting with 2 milligrams of THC and building up to the highest tolerable dose. Some people can go to 10 milligrams. Some people can go to 200 milligrams. There is research showing that as little as 30 milligrams of THC can be effective in killing cancer. The lowest level of the lowest amount of THC that I've seen in my patients has been 40 milligrams of THC. I've seen others that didn't get the benefits of THC until they went to 100. Now, the reason for that, it was demonstrated in some of the research that I cite in the book, and there are what's called dose response curves to different cannabis extracts made from different cultivars, or as what most people refer to as strains.
Yeah.
Strain is a word that's usually used to describe bacteria and viruses, but not plants. So I don't use the word strain very much. I prefer variety. One variety of cannabis that's extracted may kill the tumor cells at very low concentrations, but another variety of cannabis that is extracted may require 5 times that low amount in order to start killing the cancer cells. So it's always important to start low and build up to the highest tolerable dose, because you don't know what the potency is as far as your particular cancer. You don't know the potency of the medicine that you're using. Now, I go even further, and I have some theories that I bring forward in this book. And there is some evidence that to support these theories, that combining multiple varieties of cannabis when you make the oil gives you a better chance of having all of the compounds that are going to be needed to kill your particular cancer cell. And what those compounds are might be different for breast cancer than it is for colon cancer or liver cancer or brain cancer. For example, in glioblastoma brain cancer, it looks like the two most beneficial cannabinoids are CBG and CBD. It looks like you can, in the research that I've seen, you can be just as effective in killing those glioblastoma cells with CBD and CBG, even more effective than with THC. But that's not the case for all cancers. Now, the other thing that I just want to mention briefly is most cannabis oil is extracted with ethanol, which is a polar solvent. So there are two basically solvents are categorized as polar and non-polar. And they're just different. They take out different compounds from whatever they're being used as a solvent for. Now, in doing the research for this book, I found some research that showed that when a particular variety of hemp was extracted with a polar solvent like alcohol, that it didn't kill any of the cancer cells. But when the same plant was extracted with a non-polar solvent, which the most common one is CO2, but also things like hexane and butane. And I don't recommend butane for home extraction at all. It's a dangerous compound, but done professionally in a professional lab, butane can be a very effective solvent for cannabis. So when they didn't use butane, they used a hexane-like compound. And when they extracted this hemp plant with a non-polar solvent and then applied it to the cancer cells, it killed them. So not only do you want to consider using multiple cultivars, multiple varieties of cannabis, you also want to consider extracting with more than one solvent and combining those oils from those two extractions to get your medicine. I could go on for hours. Just tell me what you want to hear, and I'll go into more depth.
Well, I mean, that's enlightening in itself right there. I've heard others talk about the aspects that you were just mentioning of making the oil with multiple cultivars and being more successful in cancer treatment doing that. There's several people I follow, obviously, that are doing great work. Not nearly as in depth from a research perception as you have, because I know that's what drives you is the research. But they've basically said exactly the same thing as you just said. That avenue is the most successful with the multiple cultivars. But I haven't heard using different solvents and mixing the two. That's a new intriguing idea.
No, nobody else has come to that conclusion. That's my idea. And
I could see where it could be beneficial because, like you say, different solvents are going to extract differently, obviously. With that, we've got to go ahead and take our next sponsor break. And then we'll just talk a little bit more about the research that you've done, some of the work you've done with helping patients. And, finally, the fact that obviously this is not at the miracle cure stage by any means.
Right.
Yeah. We'll dive into that a little bit more after the sponsor break. And then we'll let our guest here, Dr. Joe, tell us exactly where you can find the book and all that good stuff right after this.
Howdy, Colt Power here. These days, many people are choosing to add CBD to their wellness routine. Why? Some like CBD for how it may help them with their focus. Others enjoy the way the plant compound may assist them with their sore muscles and relaxation. For me, CBD has been a game changer in keeping my old sports injuries managed so I can work out and be present for my family. If you've ever been curious about CBD, I invite you to check out our Texas-grown, Texas-made products at powerbiofarms.com. That's power, BIOPHARMS.com.
Thrive Apothecary offers an experience truly unique from anything else in Texas. A full-service cannabis solution that is doctor-owned and offers customers every level of cannabis legally available in Texas. From traditional CBD products to emerging hemp-derived THC edibles, smokables, and now medical cannabis. As a licensed medical cannabis provider, prospective patients from anywhere in Texas can book a sponsored online eligibility consultation to determine if they qualify for a medical marijuana prescription from the comfort of their own home. Visit thrivetx.com for more information.
The official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective. Distributed on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and many more, to give Texans information regarding policy, industry, and culture. And now, back to this week's show.
Welcome back to the Lonestar Collective, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective. I'm your host, Christopher Solia, and I'm joined again by our very special guest, Dr. Joe D. Goldstrich. Welcome back, Doc.
Thank you.
We're talking about your new book, the Cannabis Cancer Connection. I keep wanting to get that backwards. I don't know why, but anyway, the Cannabis Cancer Connection and all the good information that's in it. I wanted to point out, I think I told you via email before the show that I haven't finished the book yet, but when I got it, and I just kind of skim back and forth when I get a new book from cover to cover and see what might interestingly pop out to me. I don't know if we ever talked about it in the past, excuse me, but I have what's called a precancerous condition, blood disorder, called MGUS, which
Called what?
Called MGUS. Basically, it's the monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significance is what that stands for, but it's basically the precursor to multiple myeloma. So as I was flipping back and forth through your book, I noticed there's a segment on multiple myeloma and leukemia within there. And so that intrigued me, and that was one of the first things I had to dive into. And what I noticed reading that and some of the other sections on actually where you dive into the individual cancers, you actually go into what basically you have seen works, correct?
Well, basically what I did for the individual cancers, which is about a third of the book, is I combined my personal experience, but I haven't treated every single one of those cancers that's mentioned in that section of the book. But I went into the medical literature and searched extensively and deeply for all of the research that had been done in the laboratory treating isolated cells from those particular types of cancers. And I compiled all of that information and put it together and made a suggestion for what a person with that type of cancer might use. And so probably around 15 different cancers covered in that section of the book. And one of the things I was thinking about at the break that I want to mention is that in the cannabis plant, all of the cannabinoids are in the acid form. The acid form is converted to the neutral form by heat. So, and different temperatures are required to convert different acid cannabinoids to their natural or neutral form. So when you take some plant material and smoke it, the heat of that combustion will convert the THC acid to THC, and the THC has effects that we all know about. But there are some cancers that respond to the acid form of the cannabinoid. For example, there are some prostate cancers that respond much better to THC acid, the raw form of the plant that hasn't been decarboxylated, hasn't been heated, than to decarboxylated THCA, THC. So most people wouldn't know to incorporate acid forms. So in that section of the book, I talk about the acid forms for each of those cancers that may be helpful. Not every cancer requires an acid form, but there are several, about 50%, I would say, that have shown sensitivity to CBDA, THCA, even CBGA. And it's really important to know about that and how to use the acids because it gives you an extra potency to your treatment. I had in my practice, I had not been impressed with the use of decarboxylated cannabinoids in the treatment of prostate cancer. So when I saw this research from Dr. Mary in Israel showing that some prostate cancers really responded much better to THCA, it was a game changer. And then I started incorporating THC into my protocols for patients with prostate cancer.
That's something that I've just started reading a little bit about, is the fact that THCA has been found to be more successful in some cases than THC per se, right? Same thing with all the other cannabinoids as well.
Most of the time, you want to use them both because we don't have the ability, because of Schedule 1 and the lack of research, we don't know what a particular cancer is going to be sensitive to. So you have to use a shotgun approach and hit it with everything that is reasonable. So in that section with the protocols for the various cancers, I say for this particular cancer, you probably don't have to use the acid forms. Mm-hmm. And where there's research, I point that out. I wanted to make sure the listeners learned about that.
Sure. It's important information to have. Everything that's in the book that I've seen so far is important information to have. And that's the other aspect, I think, that you point out in the book in the beginning, maybe in the introduction. I don't remember where I saw it, but your purpose for this book is not just for patients, right?
That's correct. I want doctors to understand how beautiful a drug they have at their disposal and begin to learn how to use it and to cooperate with their patients when the patient come and say, I want to use cannabis. Oh, don't do that. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it can be a very powerful adjunct to chemotherapy and radiation. There is research showing that when you add cannabis to some chemotherapeutic drugs, that you get a more powerful cancer-killing effect than either one of them alone. And one other thing I want to just mention, in doing the research, I didn't know this until I did the homework, but it turns out that if you're getting IV chemotherapy, the best way to use cannabis with that chemotherapy is to not use the cannabis for 24 to 48 hours before the chemotherapy or the radiation, and then not use it again until 24 to 48 hours after the chemotherapy or radiation has been administered, that you get a better effect from the combination of chemotherapy and cannabis when you take that window around the administration. Now, it's different if you're taking a chemo that's a daily use. You could continue to use it with the cannabis. But for those IV treatments, and hold the cannabis for 36 hours before and 36 hours after, and then use cannabis, and you'll get a better effect than if you continue to use it throughout that interval.
That's good information to have too. I hadn't heard that one at all. I know, talking about the conjunctive treatments though, I have read research out of Italy. That's obviously being a MGUS patient with being a precursor to myeloma. I'm very interested in the research surrounding cannabis and myeloma, obviously, and there are several studies, out of Italy, and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head because I didn't even think this would be a subject, but where they talk about THC and CBD both enhancing the use of one of the current drugs that they use for multiple myeloma, carfilzomib, and using that in conjunction, they have a better than 50% increase in reduction of cancer. And of course, this is preclinical. Obviously, this is laboratory, not clinical trials, but that's still very promising research to me. Yes,
the Italians have done a lot of research on cannabis. I'd say Italy and Slovakia. You wouldn't expect great research coming out of Slovakia, but they're doing it. And they actually are doing, and Israel in particular, in Spain, great research. And we're not seeing the research from the United States because of Schedule 1. And but we still need clinical trials. We have this preclinical research, and it's useful. And preclinical research sets the stage for what you do in a clinical trial. But we need those clinical trials, and they're years away, Chris. They're not going to happen tomorrow or even next year.
No. Even if they descheduled tomorrow, it would be a few years before you saw any of that happening.
Yep. Or the results would be several years down the road.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
At any rate, well, with that, I just want to give you an opportunity. Once again, we said it early on in the show. Where's your book available?
Amazon.
Amazon.com, folks.
Right.
And it's inexpensive. It's easy to read, easy to follow along. So if you're interested in the whole cannabis cancer subject, this is definitely a book you want to get, in my opinion. I want to thank you, Doc, for coming on. As usual, you're always very gracious in joining me on whatever project I'm working on. But I wish you the best of luck with the book and continued success, obviously.
Thank you, Chris. And I just want to make a request of those folks that do go and get the book at Amazon. Please leave me a review. I only have 5 reviews for the book. The book has sold quite a few copies, but there's only a handful of reviews. The reviews fuel the sale, and people will see the reviews, and then they'll learn that the book does have benefits. So please leave me a review if you purchase the book.
Absolutely. It's the least a person can do when you get the information you're going to get in this book. I promise you. And I want to take a real quick moment and apologize for my stuttering and stumbling. It's allergy season for me, folks. So I've got constant flow down the back of my throat. For now and then, I got to stop and keep from choking. But again, thank you, Doc, for joining us. And, you're welcome to come on and talk about this subject again anytime. We'd love to have you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And, I grew up in Texas, and I have fall allergies also. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. A lot of people have spring allergies, but I had Texas fall allergies. They're a real pain.
It can be a real problem if you're not prepared.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to close the show out. And thanks again for joining us, Doc. And thanks to you, our audience, for joining us as well. As always, we love having you here. If you have any suggestions for any guests, you can email us at Texas Cannabis Collective or txcanico.com. Visit our website and fill out the form there. And again, thanks for joining us on the show.
You're welcome.